Greetings all, and welcome to part 2 of my Airfix 109 F-4 starter set build. In this video we'll be painting the scheme that everyone voted on, which is the single included one from JG77 in this kit. So without further ado, let's do a bit of airbrushing. After 12 hours, the Vallejo primer was fully cured, so I began to mask the yellow eastern front marking bands on the wings and fuselage using some Tamiya masking tape. I then mixed up around 2 drops of Model Air Insignia White and 1 drop of Model Color Vermilion Red to create a pink base for the yellow to see if this would make it easier to apply, and surprisingly it actually did. Spraying on the Vallejo Model Air RLM 4 yellow was definitely a lot easier onto the pink, and after only about 3 light passes the yellow was pretty solid. I gave the yellow markings a few hours to fully cure before masking them off, and then proceeding to mix up 7 drops of Vallejo Acrylic Flow Improver, 3 drops of AK Interactive Thinners, and 7 drops of AK Interactive RLM 65. However, I didn't actually shake the paint well enough, and the paint came out too thin and very inconsistent. So after giving the paint a good shake, I mixed up the same mixture, and this time it sprayed on a lot more nicely. I applied several passes on the underside of the aircraft, generally filling in each panel, and then doing a few passes over the entire surface to make it nice and uniform. The AK paint sprayed really well with only a few small amounts of tip drying and very little speckling, though I did find it takes a bit of thinning and testing to get the mixture just right. Once the first few coats of RLM 65 had been applied, I then added 2 drops of Flow Improver, 1 drop of RLM 65 and 2 drops of Vallejo Model Air Light Gull Grey to make a more lighter and pale variation. This was then sprayed lightly onto the middle of all the panels to create some post shading and a bit of panel variation. For more extreme areas I added a bit of white and then repeated the process to get some more pale results. The painting guide showed quite a thin line of RLM 65 on the underside of the fuselage, but I still decided to paint quite high up on the fuselage sides to try and give the RLM 70 upper surfaces some variation by having a lighter base colour. And speaking of the darker upper surface, after I let the RLM 65 dry, I then masked off the areas of it I wanted to keep using some Tamiya masking tape, before then mixing up 6 drops of Vallejo Flow Improver, 1 drop of AK Interactive Thinners, and 6 drops of well-shaken AK Interactive RLM 70. Once this was mixed up, I then sprayed it onto the entire upper surface of the aircraft in the same way I'd applied the RLM 65 on the underside. I had a fair bit of trouble with tip drying using this colour, possibly since I had a slightly thicker mixture with less of the Flow Improver, though I've recently picked up some Vallejo retardant to see if this helps prevent tip drying with the acrylic paints. As you can see, the RLM 70 produced a pretty bland and dark surface, so I mixed in a single drop of RLM 71, which is a lighter green. I then sprayed it on the middle of the panels and a little bit more extra on certain panels to create some variation, but found that this was very subtle, so I ended up adding a few drops of Insignia White and RLM 2 Grey to the mix to get a much more pale and lighter variation. On certain panels I sprayed the colour a lot more heavily to make them look a little bit more worn out. I also applied it thicker on the upper surface of the fuselage for some artificial shading. In the end, I was quite happy with the results I achieved, so I removed the masking tape, and unfortunately I had to do some brush painted touch-ups to the yellow bands, as for some reason some of the paint came off with the masking tape. Perhaps I needed to give the yellow a little bit longer to cure before adding the tape, as normally I don't have any issues with Tamiya tape pulling off any paint. I did consider airbrushing the yellow on, but looking at references of 109s from JG77, some had some pretty rough looking yellow bands. After a few coats of yellow, I did some touch-ups with RLM 70 to get a sharper edge between the RLM 65, and also to cover some other bits of chipped paint which seemed to have also occurred. I kind of liked how it made a subtle patchy look in some areas, and in the end with the varnish and weathering applied, it wasn't very obvious. Speaking of varnish, to protect the paint from any further damage and prepare the model for decals, I then sprayed both the upper and lower surface of the model with several passes of Vallejo Acrylic Gloss Varnish. I mixed it to a ratio of 4 drops of Vallejo Acrylic Flow Improver, 2 drops of acrylic thinner, and 5 drops of the varnish. As well as sealing the paint, it also provides a smooth glossy surface which helps the decals adhere and also prevents silvering. I allow the gloss varnish to dry overnight and then started applying the decals. Being a starter set, you only have one scheme and virtually no common stencils. Nevertheless though, Airfix have included one fuel placard and some engine detail stencils, which is a nice addition to the roundels and markings. After a few seconds soaking in warm water, the decals were slid off the paper and applied onto the model using a brush. I also used the brush to apply some water before adding the decals onto the model to help make positioning them a little bit easier. Once in place, all the decals received some Tamiya decal adhesive, followed by Vallejo decal softener, which both help the decals to soften and stick more to the model's surface details. The decals were pretty good, although they did seem a little bit thicker than the usual cartograph ones, and I did find that the roundels, especially the crosses, folded a little bit more. I would also suggest painting the yellow markings rather than attempting to use the decals, as I reckon it would be pretty tricky to line them up, and they're also a little bit thick. Once again, the model was set aside overnight, this time for the decals to settle, and then the next day I moved on to some detail painting. The masks for the landing gear bay were removed, and I painted the tail wheel a coat of RLM2 grey. The main landing gear struts, which I'd left on the sprue, were then painted RLM65 blue on the outside to match the wings, and the antenna was painted with RLM70 to match the fuselage. After a few more touch-ups with these colours, I painted the tyre of the tail wheel initially flat black, and then carefully painted some white markings on it, neatening up any mistakes later on with some more flat black. I've heard various reasons for the white wall tyres that appear on some 109s, ranging from them being a marker to denote that the wheels are designed to ground the aircraft and prevent static discharge, rather than the aircraft needing to be grounded via a wire when refueling. Or possibly another reason I've heard is there was a material shortage, so substitute materials were used, resulting in white tyres. But either way, White 1 of JG77 had white walls according to reference photos, so that's how I painted them. The main landing gear was glued into place, and though the fit was not super tight, after holding the wheels in place they did become solid enough to add the tyres, but I would recommend keeping the weight off the landing gear for a few hours while the glue bonds. The main wheels had been primed on the sprue using some Vallejo Gloss Black primer, so I only had to do a couple of light touch-ups using some Vallejo Model Color Flat Black. Once this was done, I then sprayed the entire model in Vallejo Matte Varnish. This would seal and protect the decals, and give the aircraft a more accurate matte dull finish, rather than the glossy finish which it currently had. To provide a solid coverage, but prevent any build-up of the varnish while it was wet, I sprayed in several light passes back and forth. Once the upper surface had been sprayed, I let it dry for a few hours, and then applied the matte varnish in the same fashion on the underside. With that, the painting was completed, so I once again sat the aircraft aside overnight for the varnish to cure, before I'd then move on to the weathering process. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to help things out. And if you have any feedback that you want to give me, or any kits that you'd like to see me have a look at or build in the future, then leave it down in the comments below. A massive shout out to my wonderful patrons for helping me to fund not only buying these kits, but also the products I use to make them, and the time I spend making these videos. Currently, I'm still finishing off this kit, so part 3 may not be ready by next week, but we'll see how things go. If it's not, I'll try and have another build video of some kind as well. And I'm also working now on a inbox review of the Helldivers, since that was the aircraft that you guys voted on for the next series of inbox reviews. I'm probably going to do them all at once, and I've also picked up the Academy Helldiver, so I'll be adding this one to the other 2 that we'll be having a look at. That's it for this video, but thanks again for watching, and until the next one, take care, and model on.